Welcome to Innovation in Government. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is David Ray, the Public Sector Chief Technology Officer at Micro Focus Government Solutions. David, welcome back to the program.
Well, welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Before we get started, let me set some context for our discussion. Think of 2020 as a year of confluence. Security, cloud migrations, application rationalization, the move to Agile or DevSecOps mindset has been part of the federal IT modernization efforts for some time. But as the maturity of these efforts accelerate and the understanding of customer experience increases, agencies are primed and ready to make digital transformation more than a bunch of one-offs or talking points. The Office of Management and Budget has said as agencies move to the cloud, there are several things to consider. Agencies must assess the need for and the usage of applications, and agencies must discard obsolete, redundant, or overly resource-intensive applications. OMB says the decreased application management responsibilities will free up their workforces to focus on improving service delivery by optimizing their remaining applications. At the same time, the growth and acceptance of things like robotics process automation and other automated capabilities for security, as an example, are changing the way agencies work and at a speed that sometimes the workforce has trouble keeping up with. So how can agencies strike the right chords when it comes to melding all of these efforts to drive IT modernization? Well, that's where my guest comes in. Once again, David Ray, the Public Sector Chief Technology Officer at Micro Focus Government Solutions. David, I know I threw a lot out there, but let me back up and just start with security. I think that's the number one priority when I talk to CIOs and other people in the federal IT market. Security, security, security. The government's going down a very successful path in many regards with the continuous diagnostics and mitigation, the CDM program. What are you seeing from when you talk to government clients and customers about CDM, and where's it heading in 2020?
Well, I think, first of all, I commend for some of the changes they made with CDM Defend, where they opened up the procurements to be more flexible in solving some of the advanced requirements around compliance and security. In the past, it was a very sequential model between phases. So in this phase, it will allow vendors, like us, Micro Focus, to innovate a little faster and then provide some of that innovation back to meet the core CDM requirements. So things like advanced correlation and collection of events and data, as well as analytics and remediation of those events, things that we could, quite frankly, could have done in phase 1 and phase 2, weren't really part of the scope of CDM. Now that they are, it enables us to couple that with some of the operational analytics and provide a true security and operations center versus an independent, NOC and SOC for agencies, as well as tie in user behavioral and analytics and machine learning, some of those capabilities as well. So it opens up that aperture of requirements that a CISO can try and solve. So we're very excited about that and about some of the innovations that we can do, and we're not stuck in a box anymore where we have offerings but they don't meet the requirements or the scope that were limited in the first couple phases. So hopefully it'll be an exciting year as they get their budget.
As you talk to the different chief information security officers and others that were working on CDM, do they understand that the aperture has opened, that there is less prescription and more kind of, there's a dynamic way to solve this problem, which is better security?
I think they do, and they actually drove the change because they were frustrated themselves. They were stuck with the specific requirements, and they could only solve things like compliance and configuration management in phase 1 and phase 2. Now they can focus on true, user identity management, as well as some of the advanced innovations and analytics and collecting real-time metrics and things that that may not even be a requirement yet. They may evolve over time. So they have flexibility to do that to keep pace with the threats that are out there today.
And I think that's key, is that the keeping pace with the threats that are out there today. And I think that's one of the things that they complained about CDM early on, which was, well, we have certain tools, you want us to replace these tools and how long it's taken to get the tools. And I go back to the WannaCry virus as the one moment where they said, oh, that CDM thing actually does work pretty well. You talked a lot about different tools, different innovations. Is there one or two things that you are seeing a lot from agencies requesting right now? Anything very specific?
I am. I think what they're starting to realize is the amount of events and data that they're trying to track is simply colossal. And aggregating information in its raw form has become extremely challenging. So they're starting to investigate ways that they can segment the event collection and actually correlate events better to give them better analytics. And in our portfolio, that's been one of our feature areas are advanced correlation. So we can take some of the aggregation technologies the agencies are using today to help them do a better job with analytics, but providing real-time metrics and correlation. So that's why we're excited to bring some of those innovations to the CDM stakeholders, across government. And probably the other area that I'm hearing a lot about is the user behavioral and event analytics, especially with the advancements in RPA that you mentioned in your opening. A bot has to have a credential to run, and also that credential should be removed after it's run. And there's some specific OMB, I guess, memorandums around that came out last year. But the ability to do that dynamically and then track and monitor the bot, as well as all the other entities that are on your network, and use mathematical models to derive the unknown threats, I think is an area that they're starting to look at, other than the typical business rules you would track with user behaviors.
The other reason why, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, that user behavior is becoming more popular, one of their focus areas is the push for zero trust. You hear that a lot where, okay, how do we ensure that David Ray is David Ray, and if he's logging in from Washington, D.C. at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, he should be logging in from Washington, D.C. at 10 p.m. Versus, hey, David also logged in at 7 p.m. from California. How does that work?
Or at the same time,
yeah.
And then maybe he's traveling to California or not. And that's what we call rule-based user behavior analytics, and we've been doing that within our SIM for years. I think what's more challenging is the unknown threats, which you can only derive by basically studying somebody's pattern to see if it's abnormal or normal. And then mapping patterns to roles, so that you can do it without really understanding the user credentials. And that's what we're doing within our Interset offering. It was developed at In-Q-Tel as part of the CIA initiatives, but it was all about understanding the unknown threats. So it would complement the normal business rule-based threats of seeing somebody logged in twice or from an odd location or at odd hours. It's looking for those patterns and learning over time what those patterns are, and then it can understand the unknown threat. It actually uses about 500 different mathematical models. So it's always the mathematicians that get these things right,
You talk about data, and we have to then talk about cloud, right? Mm-hmm. And there's no way to process all this data without at least having some tools, some ability in the cloud. But before we go down that path, let me ask you, OMB's Cloud Smart memo, the final strategy, is pushing a year old. I think June will be a year old. They put an application playbook, rationalization playbook after that, sometime a few weeks later. Cloud Smart's, you're seeing a difference there too, the way agencies are approaching moving to the cloud.
I do, and I really have to commend the council and for the work and the research they did and interviews they conducted to understand what was wrong with Cloudburst. I mean, it was more or less a cloud mandate and a justification for IT upgrades and IT refresh, more so than migration to cloud. And it worked for a lot of commodity applications, but some applications, quite frankly, cost a lot more money to run in the cloud based on their storage model, and some applications you just simply can't shift and lift or move to cloud. But agencies were attempting to do that, and there was a whole lot of mistakes that occurred. So with Cloud Smart, the emphasis on doing that total cost of ownership and understanding the application type and assessing the risk and the business or mission value of the application in the cloud, in addition to the TCO, is what I commend, because that it's something that was called out in Cloud first. They should do an assessment first, but there was not a prescriptive model on how to do it. So now they've given everybody this framework and a prescriptive model. That said, I wish it was a little more prescriptive.
Cloud first was a little too prescriptive. This one could come a little back.
Well, a little bit. And if, for example, they said do a data call, well, we can do that discovery of applications automatically. Why do a data call? And once you do it, it's dead, right? So they could have given some advice on how to do that. And then tracking your portfolio, they didn't say how. You should use a portfolio management tool to do application rationalization. There's a lot of variables you need to track to calculate cost and total cost of ownership. And they didn't really talk much about segmentation of the different application types, because you may recompose an application, refactor an application, or in some cases, with the legacy applications, we found there's a huge ROI on simply doing rehost, which means not touching the legacy or the COBOL, rehosting it in Linux in the cloud. And the first step of that is to do some assessments. And we've rolled out a very powerful enterprise analyzer just for those legacy applications, and we've had some success within DoD and civilian doing rehost, so you could take advantages of the cloud and save tens of millions of dollars initially, and then hopefully use that money to transform.
Let's dig just a little deeper on the rehost piece.
Sure.
So currently I'm hosting in my data center. It's on a quote unquote fairly modern infrastructure, though could be more modern. You're saying is it different than lift and shift? Just saying we're going to take that and rehost it in the cloud?
It's very different. This is specifically for those mainframe applications or that are running on like a Unisys or a mainframe platform written in COBOL. Almost 50% of the high value assets in almost every agency are still legacy, and people don't talk about that when they move to cloud. They talk about the easy, modern standard technologies that you can shift and lift using Docker and containers or VM and shift those things to the cloud. Whereas with COBOL apps, you just kind of want to let it go away, or we paid for it once, let's let it run, and that's why they've been there for 40, 50 years now.
So they're taking that old legacy app that's on a mainframe and they're able to put it in the cloud?
Correct. We have an enterprise analyzer which will assess all the data stores and the enterprise application in its COBOL form, and then we compile COBOL and machine code in Linux, and we can run that in Azure. We've done this for several federal customers and essentially retire tens of millions of dollars that you're spending on MIPS to run that application. It's a very economical, low-risk platform. So when you look at Cloud Smart, it would have been nice if they had mentioned some alternatives. Geo did a nice study, and they picked the top 10 studies. Actually, 3 of those were using our technologies, the three top ones, which is, some of them were just moving commodity email applications to the cloud too, which is, to me, a no-brainer. But when it comes to those legacy COBOL applications and mission-critical high-value assets, I think a low-risk approach is this rehost strategy. And then with the savings, if you've got a working capital fund and you've done your MGT Act, maybe you can repurpose them. Keep Jerry Connolly happy.
You bring up a great point around the legacy applications, because I think agencies focus with Cloud First on those commodity, those emails. I mean,
Correct.
I think it's something like 78%, maybe it's even more now, of all agencies have email in the cloud, and the several that don't, the Justice Department I think is one of them, and maybe SSA is another. They're getting there, they're on their way. So now as agencies look into 2020 and beyond, they're looking at, okay, what else can I do? And that's where that mission legacy side comes in. And I think that's important because not every app is the same, so you have to kind of keep that in mind. You guys have a way to score those apps too, right?
Absolutely. And we have about a questionnaire, about 150 different questions, which just allows you to describe the architecture and its footprint, its storage models that then allow you to make some decisions, whether it's a standard client server or web-based end-tier application, or it's a legacy application. It's a different value proposition for taking to cloud, and it's usually the heavy compute applications with storage that are going to be incredibly expensive when you get into those S3 storage buckets and some of those issues that you have with moving to the cloud. And a lot of times that cost grows dynamically just as your compute and elasticity grows in the cloud. And agencies were totally unprepared with how to manage that, how to handle it. So it's incredibly important to do those assessments first. And with the legacy apps, I like the rehost model as the first step to free up some of the savings for transformation eventually. It opens up REST APIs. You can leverage enterprise services for user access and credentialing that are, you can shift DevOps off, just the DevOps load off the mainframe to the cloud and keep the production workload there and help have a common DevOps approach for all of your technologists in your workforce, things like that.
You mentioned DevOps. We're going to get to that in the next segment, but first let's take a quick break. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network.